All right, so you are going to guess these poorly described mother figures in TV and movies. And so I want you guys to, like we've done in the past, around the table, you guys are going to have one person at that table be the spokesperson. You guys have 30 seconds to identify the correct answer. You're also going to have a picture with this, so have your representative for the table shout out the answer. The first person to get it right gets the point for that table. If you shout out an answer and it is incorrect, your table is eliminated for that round, all right? So let's go ahead with the first one. Ian, who is our first poorly described mother? Deep emotional baggage leads a mother to hold her family hostage in a world she controls. WandaVision, great guess, but incorrect. So, nope, that's not it. This table's eliminated. Picture should start coming into focus soon. Any other tables got a guess? We got it back here, the Wagner table. That's Abuela. Deeply emotional baggage leads a mother to hold her family hostage in a world she controls. That's a very poor yet apt description. All right, next one. Single mother claiming virgin birth gives away a child to strange travelers she just met when the child is only 9 years old. Mary, that is incorrect. Good guess. Who else could this be? If you haven't seen it, you know of the movie. What? Boom! It is Shmi Skywalker. Anakin Skywalker's mom. That is correct. Yep, we'll count Anakin Skywalker's mom. That counts. All right, so 1-1. Next one. Here we go. An overwhelmed mother leaves on vacation without her child and decides to return by taking the scenic route home with a sketchy band of strangers. He said it first. It is Home Alone. Bonus point to who can tell me the mom's name. It's not Kevin's mom. What is her name? Kate McAllister. All right, 2-1. Very close. You guys were almost there. All right. Bonus.
15-second bonus.
All right. What was the type and name of the band that John Candy leads as Gus Polinski in Home Alone? So she rides back with the band. What kind of band was it? Polka. Jonah is on fire back here. You never heard of their album? Polka, Polka, Polka? All right, next one. Here we go. Condescending mother stifles son's genius even after he moves far away from home. Who is this condescending mother who stifles her son's genius? What? Drew's mom? Oh, Gru. No. Leonard? It is not Leonard's mom. You guys already guessed. Your table was out. Did you guys say it? Sheldon, did you say Sheldon's mom? You didn't. This table did. Okay. Point for the middle table. Good job, ladies. That is Mary Cooper. Next one, number 5. Due to a childhood deformity, mom locks daughter in room until she is an adult. After the mother dies, the daughter wreaks havoc on hometown, learning to relate to people. Elsa, you're going to help me on this one. I don't know the answer to this one. You got it? Wait, you said Elsa. What's the mom? Elsa's mom? Okay. We'll give that to you. What? Queen of Arendelle. I'm giving a bonus point up here for naming the country. That's not Mary Cooper, but... Okay, next one. Here we go. A meddlesome mom always interferes in her grown children's lives, causing ongoing stressful situations. Who is this meddlesome mom always interfering in her grown children's lives? What? What? Marie. Yep, it is Raymond's mom, Marie Barone, in one of the greatest shows of all time. Everybody Loves Raymond. Well done over there. All right, number 7. A former nun hooks up with a wealthy, engaged man, adopts and enlists his 7 children to realize her dream. You didn't even let me finish reading it. These hills are, in fact, alive. It is Maria von Trapp. Yep, very good. All right, number 8. A makeshift mother raises teenager in the city and enables him to spend time with criminals every night due to her absentee parenting. Ooh, a little bit quieter. Dude is killing it. That is Aunt May and Spider-Man. Number 9. We're going to make this one fair for everybody else and tell Jonah he has to read this with his eyes closed. Number 9, here we go. Single mom upends and moves her daughters into a home with 4 strange men after a shotgun wedding to an attractive widower. Ooh, who is this? Jonah, 15 points if you get this one, buddy. Nope, not Little Women. Here's a story. The Brady Bunch. No, they. Okay, yeah, I believe that. Maryland got that. I think you guys get a point here too. So good job. Last one, or we have this one and a bonus, don't we? All right. So number 10. Here we go. A mom of young children constantly hides her identity and engages in actions that consistently endanger her children. Eli got that one. He beat you out just barely with The Incredibles. It is Elastigirl. She is the mom figure here. What is her real name? Or her name in the movie? Helen Parr, yep. All right, bonus one, here you go. Last one. A divorced mother of 2 neglects her children's well-being, which leads to her son's kidnapping and makes it all about her by falling in love with the police officer assigned to her case. Micah got that one. That is, in fact, Joyce Byers from Stranger Things. Wow, we just shredded the respect of many mother figures in TV culture. But that was a fun one. So congrats to Jonah for winning for that table back there. All right, good job, everybody. That one was fun. Now, kind of like last week, there's not really a good way to segue from that to our teaching for the night. So we're just going to jump right into it. And so grab your Bible and turn to Acts chapter 7, all right? Acts chapter 7. So we are in the third part of Stephen's sermon, the longest sermon in the book of Acts. And so as we're making our way through Acts, we're looking at Stephen, who has been arrested. He's done some great things in the early church, and the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, don't like what he's doing. And so they arrest him and they stage some false accusations. They go and pay off some people to lie about him and say he was doing these things. And then in this kind of makeshift trial, they ask him, is this stuff true? Are all these things true? Knowing full well that it's not true because they paid somebody off to say these things. So the whole thing is pretty shady. And Stephen has to make a defense when the deck is heavily stacked against him here, right? And so he begins this defense not by saying, as most of us probably would, by saying, I didn't do this, and here's my evidence, here's why I didn't do this. These guys are lying, you guys have rigged this entire thing, and go into this like true defense of himself. Stephen doesn't take that approach at all. In fact, he takes an approach that to us is almost laughable. Like when someone accuses you of something that is false, your response is probably not going to be, well, all the way back in the days of Abraham, Like, you're not going to go that far back and start telling the story, right? But that's the way Stephen does it. So he goes all the way back and begins with the history of the nation of Israel. And so he talks about Abraham, which we looked at 2 weeks ago. Last week, he talked about Joseph and explained how Joseph is involved in all of this and how God is faithfully fulfilling his promises through somebody named Joseph. Now, this week, we get to the most influential, the most important figure in the Jewish world, which is Moses. And so we're going to talk tonight about Moses, and we're going to talk about why Stephen, and this is the big bulk of this sermon. So probably 60 to 70% of the entire sermon is involved with Moses. And that makes sense because of the importance that Moses played in the life of the Jewish people. So it stands to reason that he would camp out here quite a bit. So he's going to spend a lot of time talking about Moses. And so as we look at this passage, there's about 20 verses, verse 17 through 37. As we look through this passage together, I kind of want to break it into three unique parts, okay? And those three parts, and so you can see on your handout is color-coded this week, which I know some of you like that, so you're welcome. Different colors to indicate the different pieces of what it is that we're talking about. And so the three parts of this are one, we're gonna get on the surface of it and look at Stephen's summary or his account of the life of Moses. And this is something that his audience would have known extremely well. So this you see in blue on your handout. So when you're filling in the blanks in the blue, that's simply Stephen's summary of Moses' life, okay? Then we're going to see what truths we can glean from that story that make a difference in our own lives today. Not in the sense that, hey, because Moses did this, we should do this too, but in looking at how God interacted with Moses, we can see things about God's character that speak to us today. And that's going to be in green on your handout. And then the purple section, thirdly, we are going to look at how each section of Stephen's retelling of Moses isn't really even about Moses at all. It's actually about Jesus. So perhaps a better way of saying that, instead it's not about Moses at all, is that Stephen is describing Moses as a placeholder for God's final deliverer, Jesus. There are so much similarities between Moses and Jesus. And so we're going to look at those together. And so here's kind of the big idea, the big picture of what Stephen is getting at. Stephen's account of Moses offers powerful insights for our lives, and it shows how Moses is ultimately about Jesus. That's where we're going to end up tonight. So Stephen's account of Moses offers powerful insights for our lives, and it shows how Moses is ultimately about Jesus. So let's begin in verse 17 of Acts chapter 7. And I'm going to read through about verse 28 to begin with. Stephen says, as the time was approaching to fulfill the promise that God had made to Abraham, the people flourished and multiplied in Egypt until a different king who did not know Joseph ruled over Egypt. He dealt deceitfully with our race and oppressed our ancestors by making them abandon their infants outside so that they wouldn't survive. At this time, Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight. He was cared for in his father's home for 3 months, and then when he was put outside, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and raised him as her own son. So Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in his speech and actions. When he was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. When he saw one of them being mistreated, he came to his rescue and avenged the oppressed man by striking down the Egyptian. He assumed his people would understand that God would give them deliverance through him. But they did not understand. And the next day he showed up while they were fighting and trying to reconcile them peacefully. He said, "Men, you are brothers. Why are you mistreating each other?" But the one who was mistreating his brother pushed Moses aside, saying, "Who appointed you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me the same way you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" All right, so a familiar story for a lot of us, but Stephen here is continuing on this journey through this history of Israel, and he's tying it back to this promise made to Abraham. As God is working in things in the world, it kind of starts to go poorly, right? So last week it kind of ended on a high note that Israel was saved through God's promise, that God had put Joseph in that place to deliver them and to rescue them, and it seemed like everything was going great. A family was reunited. They had all kinds of prosperity, and things were going really, really well for them. But now how quickly the story turns and things start to go poorly for the Israelites. A new Pharaoh has taken power who doesn't know Joseph, doesn't have the same appreciation for all that Joseph did, and he starts to get concerned for the future. So he enslaves the Hebrews, and he implements effectively a population control measure that amounts to forcing the Israelites to toss their newborn babies out into the street to die. Right? So things are not going well here for the Israelites. So here's what we see in this. So Stephen's account, first of all, is that Israel is enslaved in Egypt. Israel is enslaved in Egypt. And what that means for us is that God fulfills his promises even in terrible circumstances. So the question is, how is God fulfilling his promise? You know, he promised to give them land, right? Let's go back to the promise he made to Abraham, that he would give him an inheritance. He would give him land. And here they are in a foreign land that's not their own, and they are enslaved, and they are being treated terribly. How is this God's plan and God's promise? It would make sense to us to ask that question, right? That this doesn't seem like God fulfilling his promise. This seems more like the opposite. Like things are not going well. God has abandoned them. God has left them out on their own, and life is really, really terrible for them. And we tend to gravitate toward the negative, don't we? When things aren't going well, we real easily see the things that aren't happening as we think they should. When this happens, we have a tendency to kind of split our focus, even though it's still on the same thing. And let me explain what I mean by that. When things are going poorly for us, we focus in on the details of what it is that's negatively affecting us, right? We see things that we don't like, things that are happening in our lives that we don't appreciate, we don't like, and we just focus in on the problem so much that we become blinded to everything else happening around us. But we split the focus because not only do we focus in on what is negatively taking place, we also project in our mind the inverse positive of that negative situation. So for instance, I'm being mistreated at work, and so we focus in on everything that our boss is doing to us that makes us feel mistreated and unappreciated. But we also continually think about how great it would be if that didn't exist, if our boss did treat us well, if we got the respect and the recognition that we deserved. And so we kind of put a set of binoculars to our face where one lens is the really negative side and the other lens is the positive side of what's not happening. And we look through these binoculars, and so we're so focused on the problem in front of us and how great life would be without that problem, that we don't see anything else happening around us. What we need is something or someone to step in and to kind of provide some perspective for us, to show us the different dynamics that are at play that might change our perspective a little bit. Let's think about the Israelites being enslaved in Egypt and this idea that this isn't God fulfilling his promise, okay? They were in slavery because of this new ruler who didn't know Joseph, right? But why was this new ruler so concerned with them? Because they were increasing in population, right? They were flourishing. They were multiplying. The nation of Israel was increasing and growing. Go back to the promise that God made to Abraham. It wasn't only for land. There were two parts to that promise. He promised them land, but he also promised them to be a father of many nations, to multiply, that he would be a leader of many, many people. So God was faithfully fulfilling this promise. If they had stayed just that 70 or 75 people who came when Jacob moved his family to Egypt and lived with Joseph and they all lived happily ever after, if they had stayed that just small group of 75 people, the new Pharaoh probably never would have even recognized them. He never would have paid them any attention because it was just a group of 75 people within a whole kingdom. There's not a lot to pay attention to there. But in the middle of God faithfully fulfilling his promise, that in itself is what caused a fallen and broken world to exact vengeance on God's promise. How many times do we approach things in life simply from the perspective of the negative things that are happening when we're missing the bigger picture of what God is at work doing in our lives? The gospel message in the middle of all of this is that we all are enslaved to sin in the same way that that the Israelites were enslaved to Egypt. We are all enslaved to sin, but even still, the gospel keeps advancing. Our sin, our slavery has never stopped God from building his kingdom. Each of us is enslaved in sin, but the gospel keeps advancing. Stephen, let's go back to Acts 7 here. Stephen has been arrested and he's been brought before the Sanhedrin, and even that was not enough to stop the gospel from going forth. This was not enough to stop Stephen from sharing the gospel. He finds himself in the middle of a very nasty situation with lies, deceit, ill intent against him. Sin pervades this context that Stephen is in, and yet the message still goes forward. Now, there's yet another lesson in the middle of this that's not in your handouts or on the screen that tells us that in any situation, to always make it your ambition to advance the kingdom of God. Don't let anything stop you from building up and making known the name of Christ. That's a great lesson for us to take away from how Stephen is responding to all of this. I mean, Stephen had, I think we said this last week, Stephen had absolutely every right to sit down and say, this is so unfair. I'm being mistreated. I'm being lied about. I'm being accused of things I didn't do or didn't say. I'm simply trying to serve God faithfully in the way that he has called me to do, and this is what is happening. It's so unfair. And we could sit down and we could cross our arms and we could blame God for how things are not working out in our favor. Or we can do as Stephen did, and we can boldly proclaim the truth of the gospel and that Jesus Christ is at the center of everything that we do. That is how Stephen approached this, and that's how we ought to approach this, any situation as well. So then we see Moses, and we're going back now to Moses' story. Moses kills an Egyptian, right? He's trying to help out his kinfolk, his nation. Somebody is being mistreated, and he kills this Egyptian who is oppressing and abusing a fellow Israelite, and the people reject him for it, and so obviously he didn't want people to know that had happened. He's afraid for his life. His own people rejected him instead of standing up and trying to protect him and saying, hey, we got you, we'll take care of you. They reject him too, so now not only is he a criminal, he has been outcast and rejected by his own people, and so he flees Egypt. He leaves the safety and the prosperity and the security of his position in Egypt, and he goes out into the wilderness, into a place called Midian. So let's keep reading. Let's read the next couple of verses, 29 through 32. When he heard this, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. And after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in the flame of a burning bush. When Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight. As he was approaching it to look at it, a voice from the Lord came, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. Moses began to tremble and did not dare to look. So again, we remember here that Stephen is attacking this idea that the Jews were special, that they held a special place among all of creation in God's eyes because God had given them this land, right? And that was part of their claim to fame, was God had given them this land. But look at where Moses is, and this is really crucial, really important to why Stephen mentions this in his account of Moses. He's in Midian, which is a long way from the promised land. And it's a long way from where God's people currently are in Egypt. He's out in the middle of nowhere, wandering around in a wilderness for 40 years. Right, so not only is this location not close or not pertinent to the promised land, 4 decades have passed. How many of us would feel comfortable waiting for God to do something for 4 decades? Right, I don't know of a single one of us that has that kind of patience. But that's the time frame that's going on here. Moses is out in Midian for 40 years, and here's what Stephen is reminding them of. That God reveals himself to Moses in the wilderness. And he reveals himself in the wilderness. The reason that is so important for us today to remember and to take home this truth, that there is no place too desolate for the presence of God. It does not matter what experience you are facing. There is so much hope and so much encouragement in this truth. How many times do you feel like God is not present in your life? Or that he's not acting according to your timetable? That he has left you in the place that you are in for way too long and it's just not right, and so God has abandoned you and he has left you there. There is no place too desolate for God's presence. God can show up anywhere. And when he does, he tells Moses, listen, I have heard the cry of my people, and I have not abandoned them. I am at work, and I am true to my word. I am going to fulfill my promise, and I am going to deliver them to the land that I promised to Abraham. It's going to happen, and Moses, I am choosing you as my messenger, as my deliverer, to go do that for me. Not only is that the essence of what is taking place here, but there is a subtle inference by Stephen here that just as God revealed himself to Moses and sent him to rescue his people, God has now made himself known to us in the person of Jesus. So God makes himself known to us in the person of Jesus. Let's keep reading Acts 7:33 and 34. And the Lord said to Moses, take off the sandals from your feet because the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and have come down to set them free. And now, come, I will send you to Egypt. This is pretty important here. When God is speaking to Moses in this burning bush, again, in a foreign land, he's telling him that it is holy ground. Now, Mount Sinai is revered as one of the most sacred places on the planet because of God's interaction with Moses here and what takes place on this particular mountain. But I think this is Stephen's point, that God calls Mount Sinai holy ground because God's work is not confined to the land of his people. His work is not confined to the land of his people. God's blessing falls on more than just Jewish soil, I think is what Stephen is trying to tell the Sanhedrin. You guys are so wrapped up in being God's special people because he gave you land. God's not confined to your land. He works in any place that he chooses to work. And for us today, we would do well as Christians to remember that God's work is not limited to the inside of a church building. We tend to think of it this way, though, don't we? That we go to church to worship. We go to church to pray. We invite non-believers to come to church because that's where they're going to hear the gospel message, and that's where we get to have the chance for them to respond to the gospel message. And so we operate within this mindset that in the church building is where all of the religious stuff happens. This has become the means of how we praise God, of how we worship God, of how we interact with God, of communicating with God, and of evangelizing the lost. We operate from this mindset that restricts God's work to the sacred halls of a building with a steeple and a cross on it. God deserves more than that 1% of our time, where we spend 99% of our time in other places, in our jobs, in our homes, in our communities, in our schools, in our networks, in our professional capacities. God owns every bit of that as well. Nor is he only present in the people where we would expect to find him. You see, this was the big problem, the big sticking point for the Sanhedrin and for the Jewish people, that God was only present, that God only loved the Jewish people, that this was a right that they owned based on their ethnicity, based on their biological heritage. Now, Stephen, who was a Greek-speaking Jew, so he was not a pure Hebraic Jew in the first place, so he was already kind of at odds with the Sanhedrin. But this is what Stephen wants to remind us of, that even through the story of Moses meeting God in Midian and in the kingdom of God, that it's not confined to a specific geographical location, nor is the kingdom of God committed to a specific ethnicity. His kingdom is not geographical, it is not ethnic. It transcends all of that. In fact, Paul says this very, very specifically in Galatians chapter 3 when he says, there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, since you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. What promise is that? The promise that Stephen began his entire speech talking about. He's saying, listen, my fellow Jews, because he says it over and over again, our ancestors, our predecessors, our people. He's making sure to connect to them in that way, saying, listen, it is not about our biological heritage. It is about our faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is about our faith in Jesus Christ himself. You guys are missing the bigger picture. You're not seeing clearly. Everything is blurry because you have Jesus out of focus in this entire story and how God is interacting with the people of the world. Now, all of that sounds good, but the Sanhedrin did not see it this way, right? And for all their admiration of Moses and how they revered him so much, they were not, the ancestors, the Israelite ancestors, were not always the biggest fans of Moses in his present day. Let's keep reading, verse 35 through 37. This Moses, whom they rejected when they said, "Who appointed you a ruler and a judge?" This one God sent as a ruler and a deliverer through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led him out and performed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, at the Red Sea, and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers and sisters. The Israelites rejected Moses, the most famous man in Jewish history. In Jewish minds, the greatest leader to ever walk the earth. The man who only Charlton Heston could portray in movies, right? That's how important this guy is. Moses is the most important figure. And even his contemporaries rejected him. Israel, this is Stephen's point, that Israel rejects the deliverer that God sent to free them. And here's the truth that I think we need to realize about that. The people's initial response, our initial response to what God is doing, is usually disobedience. But God persistently offers redemption to his people. And this is such an important part of this story. And it's amazing how frequently our first response to what God is doing usually is disobedience or rejection. Moses was rejected the first time, right? When he tried to rescue his people, they rejected him and they kicked him out. The second time they didn't. They accepted him as their deliverer. And even in that, they bickered and argued and turned on him in the midst of it. But Stephen has kind of this recurring theme going here as he's talking about this. Even Abraham, we go back and we think about the story of Abraham, when God had promised him this lineage, Abraham laughed at first, right? When God told him that he would have a son. He's like, me and my wife are way too old for this. He laughed at it, which is a rejection of what God was telling him. Joseph was doesn't use the language was rejected by his brothers, but it does, we talked about this last week, that the brothers didn't see him the first time, but the second time Joseph revealed himself. And we said how important that was, that Stephen is saying, listen, Sanhedrin, the first time that Jesus stood before you, you rejected him. The second time, right now, he is being clearly presented to you. You can't just dismiss him. You have to make a decision. You have to do something. But our initial response to what God is doing is often plagued by disbelief. But still, in spite of our disbelief and our unwillingness to accept and to step forward in faith, following what God is leading us to do, God persistently offers redemption to his people. Man, how much better would our lives be if instead we would respond to God's prompts in our lives with faith and obedience rather than disbelief and rejection? What work is God doing in your life and around you that you can clearly see that God is at work and God is doing something, but you have resisted jumping into it and being a part of it and getting involved in whatever that thing is that you see clearly God is calling you to be a part of, and you have resisted it, you have stayed away. Your first reaction has been to reject it. Step out in faith and be obedient to what God is calling you to do. Abraham, Joseph, and Moses all share a very specific commonality in Stephen's account of this initial response being one where things are rejected or where people are rejected or where God's will is rejected. And the second time around, there's going to be an account for it. And this is where the rubber really meets the road in Stephen's sermon. Because he says, this is the Moses who said to the Israelites, this is verse 37 again, God will raise up for you, Moses is saying this, Stephen is quoting Moses, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers and your sisters. Here is the truth for us that Jesus is the ultimate deliverer who was rejected first, but through that rejection, God brought salvation. Now remember that the Sanhedrin rejected Jesus when he stood before them just a couple of years prior to when Stephen was standing in the very same spot. But now the second time, Stephen says that you are going to encounter the reality of who Jesus is, and you must make a decision. Moses himself recognized a second that would take place. And that's what Stephen is pointing to. And he's pointing to something that the Sanhedrin would very have clearly understood the context. He's quoting Deuteronomy chapter 18 here. And it will do us well to go back and to look at that passage and to see some more context, to get some more perspective on that. The Sanhedrin probably had this memorized. So as soon as Stephen started quoting it, they knew what the rest of this context was. But here is what the rest of that passage says. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 19, Moses tells the people, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from amongst your own brothers. You must listen to him. This is what you requested from the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly when you said, let us not continue to hear the voice of the Lord our God or see this great fire any longer so that we will not die. Then the Lord said to me, they have spoken well. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. I will hold accountable whoever does not listen to my words that he speaks in my name. So now we've passed the halfway point in Stephen's sermon to the Sanhedrin, and it is becoming increasingly clear that his response to their trial of him is not a defense of himself. It is not how we would typically think of defending ourselves or making sure that our truth is heard. That there is none of that present in Stephen's language here. This is, without doubt, an assault by Stephen on the Sanhedrin's view of their own religious tradition. They don't see God at work clearly because they have not brought Jesus into focus at the center of their own nationality and their own history. Not only is Moses a precursor to Jesus, Moses himself has announced that there's going to be one that comes after me that you had better listen to. God is going to send another prophet like me, another deliverer, someone who is going to deliver you out of your slavery, out of your exile, someone who's going to lead you to the promised land, someone who's going to bring to you every promise, every blessing that God has promised to you. Someone is coming that is going to deliver that. He is going to speak my words, word for word. He is going to portray exactly what I want him to tell you, and you had better listen to him, because if you don't, you will be held accountable for it. There is zero mistake here that Stephen is saying Jesus is the prophet that Moses was talking about. Now, at this point, the Sanhedrin members' blood would begin to boil because they killed this person, right? This guy named Jesus, they saw him as a false prophet, as a troublemaker, as someone who was an inconvenience to them, and they just brushed off his life like it was nothing. And now here Stephen is standing before them saying, listen, the guy that you killed about 24 months ago, he's the one that Moses was talking about, saying this person is going to be God's prophet. You guys are going to be held accountable for what you have done. You have not only disrespected the law of Moses, you not only have claimed some right to the land that is far exceeding its usefulness and its purpose, you guys have done a tremendous injustice to what God is ultimately doing here, and you don't even see it. You have no clarity of vision around what God is doing in our lives. He is providing salvation through this prophet who succeeded Moses. He is providing deliverance for his people, for those who believe like Abraham did in faith. If you would just believe in this, you would see clearly that Jesus is who all of this has been about. It's not been about Moses. It's not been about Joseph. It's not even been about Abraham. It's not been about land. It's not been about the population size. It's not been about any of that other than faith in God and trusting what he is doing. And Jesus is the one that you guys have completely missed. From this point forward, we're over the hill in Stephen's sermon now, and so we're getting down toward the end of it, and from this point forward, things continue to escalate. And the accusations, the claims that Stephen makes from here on out, as we finish up next time talking about the law of Moses, and then as we talk about the temple of God and the role that the temple plays in all of this, which that's the next big piece that the Sanhedrin held to, that it was so sacred, it was so revered. That's what made them special, because it was God's dwelling place. They owned God's dwelling place. Stephen's going to dismantle everything they think about that as well. And we know how this ends. So it's not really a spoiler alert, but it gets so severe. This isn't just a disagreement, right? That Stephen is getting to the point where he is accusing them of things that they see as blasphemy, and they kill him for it. This is not just a simple theological disagreement. And from here on out, Stephen has taken the gloves completely off, and he is zeroing in on the fact that they have rejected God's Messiah. And so next time we're going to continue talking about Moses and how that plays out and what the role of the law in all of this is, and them going into exile, and then the temple, and then ultimately Stephen's death. So let's shift now to discussion time tonight. And so for our discussion time, I wanted to keep it a little bit easier discussion tonight. And so the questions are not as specific. They're a little more general. And that's on purpose, because I want everybody around the tables to be able to just have a conversation about not necessarily anything very specific, but about this passage. And so the first question is, what did you learn about God in this passage? So everything that we've looked at and talked about tonight, what have you learned about God? The second question is, what have you learned about yourself? in this passage. The third question is, what are you going to do differently now that you have studied this passage? And then the fourth question, who is going to keep you accountable to your answers in question number 3? Okay? So what have you learned about God? What have you learned about yourself? What are you going to be doing differently? And who's going to make sure you are doing that differently? That you're not just saying something around the table and then you don't have anybody to follow up with that. Well, we want to make sure the accountability happens. Discipleship requires accountability, so let's make sure we are doing that together. All right? Let's go ahead and discuss around the tables for about 15 minutes, and we will adjourn for the night. Into one table? Okay. Hey, let's, because of how we have got smaller tables back here, let's combine these back 3 tables right here. You guys like yours? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Students stay there. This table can stay. Let's like turn our tables and combine back here, all right?